Prick up your earballs. It's time for the power movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and winter has come to an end. While there won't be many more powder days this season, there will be a lot more podcasts, and I'll be talking to folks from all over the world of action sports. This week, my guest is Mike Wilson. He's a skier, base jumper, rope swinger who has more air awareness and natural ability than almost anyone on the planet. But he was only able to achieve a moderate amount of success as a pro skier, which I really never understood. For people who aren't fully invested in the ski culture, you might not know Mike Wilson's name, but you've definitely seen him on the internet. He puts out viral videos of him base jumping, rope swinging, and ziplining, and they generate tens of millions of views. He's a sponsor's dream, but he doesn't have any sponsors, and the cool thing about Mike is he doesn't really seem to care about that at all, and he has no filter when talking about what went on during his ski career. Before we get into the podcast, I want to thank you for listening and ask you to follow me at The Powell Movement on Instagram, share my posts on Facebook, and review me on whatever platform you listen to me on. If you want to connect with me, my email is mike@thepowellmovement.com. I'd love to hear from you. Finally, I'd like to thank my sponsors. They are Evo.com, RESQWATER, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Unofficial Networks. Please support them as they make the show happen. Now, let's talk to Mike Wilson.
Yeah, I'm actually at my parents' house right now. I tried to find the quietest room possible, so I'm actually up in my parents' room right now.
Speaking of being in your parents' room, as a child, did you ever wander into their room at the wrong time and get completely horrified?
No, I was lucky enough to never have that experience.
Never happened to me either. I wonder what that does to a kid. I wonder if it gets them into all kinds of freaky stuff later on.
I think that would just depend on the frequency, if it was a one-time thing or if it was something that they heard every night when they were a kid.
God, if you were a dad and you got to do that every night, it would be awesome. But that doesn't happen. You don't know about that, and you don't need to, I don't think. You don't have any children, do you, that you know of?
Yeah, no, I was going to say I'm not a dad yet. None of those issues yet.
Well, they happen, and things get scaled back, and that's things that people have to live with. And I'm sure everybody who's married understands what I'm talking about. You don't. Over the past couple months, you've been everywhere, and it's normal for you, I'm sure. But what have you been up to lately?
Just got back from a little trip visiting family for a week and a half in Florida. Before that, I was in Bermuda for a few days to kind of repack and see my girlfriend. Before that, I was in France for a couple weeks skiing. And before that, I was at the Olympics. Yeah, I've been on the road for the last 2.5 months, trying to ski again, as much as possible.
Yeah, and I saw that you didn't qualify for the finals at the Olympics. What happened in the qualifiers?
I wasn't competing.
I know.
I just went over to watch. But I ran into McCrae Williams, who was an old friend of mine that I've known for years and years while I was in Park City right before the Olympics. And he asked me if I was going. And I kind of laughed. I was like, why would I? I'm not competing. And he was like, no, but you've got a lot of friends who are, and it would be fun to see you over there. So I kind of was just like, yep, let me go cheer on some friends.
Well, that's pretty awesome, man. So it doesn't seem like you have too much responsibility over your shoulders these days. It's kind of, you want to go to the Olympics. Hey, yeah, I'm going to go check out my friends. I'm going to go to Bermuda. Sounds like life's good right now.
Yeah, well, I live in Bermuda. I've been there for 5.5 years. So that's where I'm based. And then I travel from there for work and for fun. And basically, since the middle of January, I planned a big ski trip this year. I blocked off a few months to go ski and didn't really decide where. You know as well as I do, if you plan a ski trip 3 months ahead of time, you can very easily get skunked. And with only a certain amount of time to ski now, that I don't live in a ski town, I just kind of was like, I'm going to set this time aside to go skiing, but I'm going to decide where I go according to who's getting snow.
I don't know you at all, so it's just my guess. But I saw you went on a trip 7 years ago, to Bermuda to jump off some cliffs. And is that what made you want to move there? Was the access and you don't have to worry about anything there?
I went to Bermuda. I was actually hired by a local production company to shoot some ads to promote tourism in Bermuda based around cliff diving. So I went down for my first time. It was just a 5-day trip. I actually had so much fun. I delayed my flight 4 times. I ended up staying for 18 days and just had a blast. And I went back a year later with the plan on being there for a month. And 5.5 years later, I'm still there. It's a great place to be based. It's easy to get to Europe. It's easy to get to the East Coast of the U.S. When I'm not in the mountains, it's nice to be able to go home to the beach and really escape everything. The only downside is that it means, like in my free time, I don't get to go, hey, I want to just jump on my mountain bike and go rip some downhill lines, or, I want to go make a base jump. Like there isn't that kind of stuff when I'm at home, but it's kind of fun because it makes it a little bit more special because I actually have to like plan trips to go base jumping or to go mountain biking or skiing or whatever. So it makes it a little bit more fun for me when I actually am back at work or on vacation.
Financially, is it easy to live there? Is it cheaper?
Hamilton, Bermuda right now is actually the most expensive city in the world to live in.
Huh.
So it's not easy at all. I live with my girlfriend down there, and she's down there on a work contract, so we're both American. So the only reason that we're able to live there basically is because of her job.
So it's more expensive than San Francisco. You're paying $4,000 a month in rent there?
$4,000 would be nice. I would love to only pay $4,000 in rent.
Wow, that is insane. So more than $4,000. Vacation in Bermuda, don't try to live there because it's way too expensive for anybody who questions how much it is.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a great place to be, but come for vacation. If you want to come live there, it's awesome, but you're looking for a job. You really want to be working there. I actually don't work in Bermuda, so I live there and then have to travel for work, which makes it a bit tricky and weird, but everybody's super friendly. It's super nice. It's a beautiful island, beautiful weather all the time, and it's only an hour and 45-minute flight to New York or Boston, so it's super, super accessible. Yeah, I just love it down there.
Well, another place that's an hour and 45 minutes from New York or Boston is where you grew up, full of friendly people as well and great weather. You're born and raised in Vermont.
Yeah. I was actually just back there for 6 weeks this November and December, but I love it back there. It's, again, another beautiful location full of great people and just so many good memories.
In terms of growing up, were you homeschooled from the start?
So I did kind of a weird schooling setup. I went to public school in Vermont from kindergarten through 4th or 5th grade. And then basically when I got sponsored by Line in 5th grade, my parents pulled me out of school for 3 months. Instead of having semesters at the school I was going to, we had trimesters. So we had a fall term, winter term, and spring term. And my parents basically pulled me out of school for the 3-month winter term and homeschooled me so that I could ski. So I did that in 5th and 6th grades, and 7th and 8th grades I took a little bit more time off. I was living in Vermont in the fall, spring, and summer. And then in the winter, I was out in Squaw Valley in California here where I am now. And in high school, I did my freshman year in Vermont at a semi-private school, kind of functions as a public school called Burr and Burton Academy. And Burr and Burton did the best that they could to kind of work with my schedule to be able to ski. But I missed something like 45 or 50 days of the 90 days in my spring term. And it was just a struggle to get things through. So as soon as I finished that, my parents were just like, we really need to get him into a ski academy. Let's figure something out. So I ended up actually going out to the winter sports school in Park City, Utah. I did my sophomore year at the winter sports school. So I finished my freshman year. I think I finished on like a Wednesday or Thursday. I had a long weekend and then flew out on Monday to the winter school and started again on Tuesday. So I went basically directly from my freshman year straight into summer school again. But by the middle of November, I had finished my sophomore year. So when most of my friends were starting their sophomore year, I was already finishing it. And then I did another year and a half at the winter school. But halfway through my junior year, I was just kind of having a little meltdown at the winter school. I just needed to be around other kids and play more sports and doing more things. So I actually transferred out and went to North Tahoe High School for one term so I could play soccer. And then for my senior year, I went back to the winter school. So I kind of just mixed everything up and made school work for me. And then there were a couple of classes that I took at the winter school and at North Tahoe that I didn't think that, really taught by good teachers, or I felt like there were things that were lacking in my education. So I took a bunch of classes at BYU as well.
Are you Mormon?
I'm not, but BYU was one of the first colleges to offer a lot of their classes online. So I was able to do things like correspondence work, and I only had to go down to the campus for midterms and final exams. Other than that, I was able to teach myself everything. The professors would videotape lectures and stuff like that and put them online. So I was able to watch everything without actually having to go down there.
So do you drink, smoke, or party?
I drink. I don't smoke. Define party, not the party, but I do like to party.
Whenever I hear Mormon, I forget everything else you're saying and have to find out if you drink.
Yeah.
So your schooling's very complicated and you made it work for yourself, but I'm going to rewind it back and go to, do you have brothers or sisters?
I do. I'm in the middle. I've got an older sister and a younger sister.
Do they have the, for lack of a better term, the screw loose that you have in terms of doing crazy things and not having fear?
Not really. Both of them are pretty down to earth. My older sister is super, super adventurous. And my little sister has become more adventurous the older she's gotten, actually. They love to have fun, but they're very calculated with what they do. I try to do that as well. I've had a very different lifestyle from most people growing up as a professional skier. I mean, I signed with Line when I was in 5th grade.
Before we even get into how your lifestyle changes, you were really into gymnastics and soccer before you were offered a contract by Line. I mean, I've seen some video of you with soccer ball, which is pretty insane what you can do. And I'm imagining your gymnastic skills from early on, although you didn't do it for a lot of your life, probably pays off in dividends today in just terms of your air awareness and everything that you know how to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, flipping and spinning is flipping and spinning. Skis, skateboard, diving board, trampoline, whatever it is, having good air awareness is the key. I was one of those kids that just had tons and tons of energy and was always super hyperactive. So my parents signed me up for, every sport they could, trying to wear me out and tire me out so that they could deal with me and my energy. So one of them that they got me into when I was young was gymnastics. And I think a lot of things from that time benefited me greatly in life later on. But one of them definitely is learning how to fall and then just building your air awareness. I think that having good air awareness is one of the best things you can give a kid.
Your ability to always put your feet down. It doesn't matter how far you're going to overshoot something. You're like a cat. You're always able to put your feet down. In fact, I heard a story once. You must have been 12 or 13 at the time. You were with, I think, Friedel Cody was filming. It was at the U.S. Open in Vermont. Burton had pushed a big pile of snow to the bottom, and you pointed it down to this big pile of snow that was more like chunky pieces of ice, and no one knew what you were going to do, and you did a running man to gainer, it sounded like. When you landed, you were like, that's my stunt man. What do you think about it? The people that saw that then were like, holy shit, this guy's different than everybody else. Do you remember that?
I don't, actually. It's kind of funny hearing it. I'm like, what story from my childhood is he going to pull up? Especially when you mentioned Friedel. But no, I actually don't remember that.
Oh, okay. In terms of your getting into skiing, you started at like 2, and I'm sure you went as often as possible. Your parents are trying to tire you out. But do you snowboard and ski board as well?
I did. So I started skiing right before I turned 2. My parents were both big skiers, and so they got me on skis super young. And then when I was 5 to 10, I actually switched to snowboarding. So I snowboarded for a handful of years. I'm from a small town in Vermont called South Londonderry, but it also happens to be the same town that Burton was started in and that Ross Powers is from. So there's a pretty big snowboard presence in that town. So I grew up snowboarding, and I was out at Mount Snow one day and saw the freestyle team in the snowboard park. And at that point, skiers weren't allowed in the park. But as soon as I saw the freestyle team in there, I immediately was like, I called my dad and I was like, I want to start skiing again. I want to join the freestyle team because the freestyle team's allowed in the park. And I became one of the best snowboarders in my class in southern Vermont in that area. But I was always a way better skier than I was snowboarder. So I started skiing again. It was only actually about 3 or 4 weeks after I started skiing that I met Jason Leventhal, who had just started Line and was starting to grow the brand. And so 2 weeks after I met Jay, I ended up signing with him. So I'd only been skiing for like a couple of months at that point.
And you're like 11 years old at this point?
Yeah. I was just a little kid, kind of right place, right time. I met, somebody who had a small ski company and was looking to expand it. He was actually making just ski boards at the time and then kind of playing around with full length skis. So when I first signed with Jay, I signed with him to ski board for him, and he was building me custom ski boards as well as skis for the following year. To give you an idea how small I was, my first ski that Line ever built for me was a 121. And then I went to a 133, and then a 142, and then a 153, and then 164. And I think that I was on a 170 something when I left Line after being with them for 9 years. That gives you an idea kind of how small I was as a kid when I first got into it.
When you sign with Line at 12, is there money involved with that, or is it more of a product thing? How does that work?
Yeah, they basically paid me, it wasn't a lot. I think it was like $1,000 or $2,000 to ski their stuff for the rest of the season. Basically, he needed a young kid who could promote the smaller products that he was making. Nobody else was really making junior twin tip skis or ski boards at that time. So Jay was like, I want to make these. I want to sell them to young kids and get more people involved in free skiing and ski boarding. He kind of just looked at me and was like, if you can ride for me for the rest of the season and basically shoot all the stuff I need for my catalog, that's worth a couple $1,000. So I don't remember exactly how much the contract was for, but I think it was $1,000 or $2,000. I do remember Jason came into my dad's real estate office at Mount Snow. My dad looked at me and he said, you're not even really a skier. Like, you still snowboard more than you ski. Are you sure you want to sign a contract to ski and ski board? And being 11 years old, I'm like, you know how much candy I can buy with $1,000?
Right.
I'm like, Dad, just sign the contract. And my dad was like, well, he was like, this could really change your life. You know, you could end up going to a ski academy and go to school, you know, that focuses on skiing, or maybe not going to college. And I kind of was just like, of course I'm going to go to college. Don't worry about it. Just sign the contract. We'll deal with all of that stuff later. And now looking back on my life, I'm like, wow, so much did change because of that contract. That kind of was what started me down a totally different path.
A lot of people at 11 years old, if someone offers them a pro contract, they're not going to tell their kid, hey, this is going to change the future of your life and you might not go to college. But it sounds like your parents were on board, like, hey, they saw the potential and they're like, once you sign this contract, it is on.
I certainly didn't go into it with that mindset. And I don't think my dad wanted me to be a pro skier, but I think that he just wanted to be ready for it if that actually developed into it. So I think he wanted to put it into my head that if I was signing a professional contract to work with somebody, that was my first job. And it's actually been my only job playing sports professionally. I think my dad wanted me to realize that until that point, it had been a hobby or just something I did for fun. And at that point, he wanted me to recognize that they weren't just paying me $1,000 because I was a good skier. They were paying me to go work for them. And so I think he wanted me to recognize that I was taking a job and I was going to be working with it, and that it could potentially grow into a full-time job. Not that that was something that either of us really wanted at that point, but I think he just wanted me to be aware that it could develop into that.
And the rest is history. Before we get into the rest, I'm going to jump into a couple sponsors really quick. And my first sponsor is Evo. And if you haven't shopped at evo.com or been to one of their stores in Denver, Seattle, or Portland, you're missing out on the best retail and online experience in the country. While that's a bold statement, it's true. In-store, Evo creates an experience like no other. The staff is fully invested in the sports, they know the product, and they're easy to talk to. No intimidating shop bros at Evo. Just people who want you to enjoy you time. On the web front, Evo offers a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders over $50, and a no-hassle return policy for everything ski, snowboard, bike, skate, lifestyle, and outerwear. On top of that, for listening to the show, they're going to give you 10% off your entire order. When you check out, use the code capital TPM, the number 10, and you'll get that 10% off. My next sponsor is RESQWATER, and they are proactive recovery. What does that mean? Well, there's no drink out there that will hydrate you better than a RESQWATER. It's science and it works. Think of it like this. When you wake up in the morning, you drink a cup of coffee to help you rise and shine. But when you really need energy, you grab yourself an energy drink. Well, with RESQWATER, it's a very similar principle. When you need to hydrate, like when you finish a workout, leave the skate park, get done practice, or get off the mountain, skip the sports drink and drink a cold RESQWATER. It's a difference you will feel. I like to drink a cold one before bed after big nights, and it's a lifesaver. No more Saturday morning headaches, and it's amazing how well it works for me. Make RESQWATER work for you by heading over to resqwater.com, and you'll save 20% on a 12-pack case. Just enter the code RESQWATERTPM, that's all one word, when you check out, and you'll get that discount. RESQWATER is also available on Amazon and Amazon Prime. Now we'll get back into it with your life, and we were talking about your dad preparing you for knowing that you could be a pro skier and you have to work for the money that they're paying you. And I would say that contract is the first step to your professional career. But I think the next step is something that falls outside of skiing. Is around 12, your parents bought you a trampoline. Having one of those and being able to bounce every single day is one of those crucial factors that made you who you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. My whole childhood, I begged my parents for a trampoline, and they were pretty against it. But I came home one day, and I told my mom I'd learned a backside rodeo on my snowboard. And up until that point, I was doing McTwists in the half pipe, and I could do front flips and back flips like wildcats and stuff. But I wasn't really doing any big, cork tricks. And as soon as I learned a backside rodeo, my mom was like, what does that mean? And I was like, well, it's a backflip with 1.5 spins. And I came home the next day, and there was a trampoline in the yard. My mom had always been against trampolines because they were so dangerous. But she just said, here's the deal. It's your trampoline, but you have to promise me that you'll never, ever learn a trick on your snowboard or your skis again. You'll learn it on the trampoline. And once you've mastered it on the trampoline, then and only then do you go do it on skis or a snowboard or a bike or anything else. And it was actually around the same time my mom came home. She was just running errands one time, and there was a 4-H camp or a Boy Scout camp or something nearby. that was throwing out a whole bunch of foam mattresses. So my mom went over to the guy at the dump and he said, these guys have paid to trash these things. Would you mind if I take them? And if I don't have a use for them, I could, bring them back in a day or two. And the guy said, sure, no problem. I came home one day and my mom had 25 little mattresses. They were like 3 feet wide by 5 feet long or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But those basically became my first foam pit. So I had mattress pads that I could throw under myself if I was going to crash or to help absorb the bounce when I was landing on the trampoline. But also for like jumping my bike and things into, I would build BMX bike jumps in my backyard and dirt jumps and throw mattress pads on them. So I was like kind of one of the first kids. I didn't really have a foam pit, but I had like all these little foam mattresses that I could use as a foam pit before foam pits really existed.
Were you into action sports at that point, like the media and the things behind it? Did you rollerblade, skateboard? I heard BMX. Were there other sports that you were doing too, and were you into the culture?
Not really at all, to be honest. I mean, when I met Jason Leventhal, it was the weekend before the X Games at Crested Butte. He told me he was going out and skiing in this event, and I had no idea what it meant or anything. I think Jason Leventhal and Mike Nick were the ones who really introduced me to action sports and got me interested in that kind of stuff. But like I grew up on the road in Vermont was paved, but it was pretty full of potholes and stuff. So it wasn't something you were going to skateboard on. And for me to get to an area that was flat enough that was paved that I could skateboard, I basically, I'd have to throw my skateboard in a backpack, ride my bike 5 miles to town, and then I could go skateboarding. So I grew up more interested in mountain biking than in skateboarding or rollerblading.
Yeah, that makes sense. In looking at people who could have been a mentor to you, was Mike Nick one of those guys? Because he was part of that line team, and you've got Jay, who's very busy with running the brand, and Mike's pretty busy with it as well. But he seems like one of those guys that was taking kids like yourself under his wing and showing them the ropes.
100%. I would not be a pro skier without Mike Nick or without Jason Leventhal. But Mike was at school at Plattsburgh, New York, and actually dropped out of school to focus on his skiing. And he moved in with a friend of mine, Reg Puri. Mike was 21 when I met him when I was 11, and Reg would have been a year or two younger. Reg grew up like a mile down the road from me in South Londonderry. So when Mike moved in, I basically was like, cool. My parents pulled me out of school. These are my buddies. We're just going to ski all day, every day. And as soon as we get off the hill, they're going to come over to my house. We're going to bounce on the trampoline until they're too tired to bounce. So, Mike Nick taught me my first Misty flip, my first rodeo flip, pretty much everything I know. And, how to break down the biomechanics of free skiing rotations, how to break down a trick and rebuild it. And the understanding of the rotations that allowed me to start doing double corks and stuff like that is all stuff that I learned from Mike Nick when I was between 11 and 15.
Are you competing as well? Are there contest series popping up and you going to different contests with the line team?
The first year or two, I skied a bunch of events in like Vermont and New England with those guys. And then we started doing some bigger ones. I think I did my first US Open when I was 12 in Colorado. So I skied events like that. And then I think my first super park was when I was 13. I very quickly realized that I much preferred the photo shoots, things like super park, to actual competitions. Because even though it's a non-competitive environment, you end up with 50 of the top athletes in the world all competing for 6 pages of images in Powder magazine. You'd be blown away by the amount of progression that happens in 1 week at an event like Super Park or Parkosaurus or anything like that back then was so much further ahead of anything else. And so that's what I really liked. I could go to an event, but at events, everybody was dialing back what they did. They were saying, I've done a bunch of 1080s and 1260s, but I know I can land a 720 or a 900 every time. So that's what I'm going to do in my run. And I was always much more interested in the progression and in learning new tricks or inventing new tricks. So I liked going to events where people were like, yeah, I've got 4 days to get the best images that I can on each of these features. What tricks can I do to get those images or that video?
That environment, it breeds more creativity and it lets people take chances, and they know if they slam, their day's not over. They can just put the shit back on and go back up to the top. And you're usually not riding with people as good as you. Maybe 1 or 2 people, but when you get 50 people around that are as good or better than you, it's going to make you go that much harder.
Yeah, exactly. Just pushing myself when I was young. A lot of people look at me and think that I'm crazy because I like to hit big jumps. But like I was saying, my first super park, I was only 13 or so years old. And so when I showed up and the smallest jump at Super Park was 70 feet, there aren't a lot of 13-year-olds who have ever even hit a jump that big. I certainly hadn't. But, I looked at it and I was like, well, I took a couple of runs through the rail line and I was like, well, I'd like to hit some jumps and be able to get something done here. So I went out and I hit a 70-foot jump. And then by the end of the week, I was hitting the jump line, 70-foot, 90-foot jumps. The next year I went back when I was 14 and I was hitting 70, 90, 100-foot jumps and getting comfortable on them. So by the time I was 15, 16, it was weird that most of my friends thought a 60-foot jump was big. And I was like, yeah, but 120-foot jumps are so much more fun. The natural progression from going to events like that when I was so young is why I'm so comfortable on things that are 120 to 150 feet now and why I like hitting huge jumps.
At that first super park, you open a ton of eyes. The line obviously knows about you. By the end of that year, when you're 13, you have 13 sponsors.
Yeah, I had 8 or 10 sponsors who were paying me, and then a few other who were either promotional sponsors or product sponsors or offering me help in some other way.
And you're 13. How much money do you think you're pulling in as a 13-year-old?
To be honest, I don't remember. It was enough that my parents didn't care that I didn't have a summer job when all my other friends were working and doing stuff in the summer. My parents were like, you're making way more money with this than you're going to with another job. So it makes more sense for you to just focus on this and then try to be a normal kid in the summer when you spend your whole winter skiing, try to hang out with friends and just still be a grounded kid.
Were you able to spend any of that money? Did you buy anything really cool?
I spent most of that money doing cool things, I think, more than anything else. It was spent learning new skills, and I bought new mountain bikes and kayaks and things like that, but it was more paying for me to learn how to do other things. A lot of the money was spent back on skiing and ski trips and training and things like that my sponsors weren't paying for and didn't necessarily care that I did, but they were things that I wanted to do. So I just was like, once I've run out of my travel budget for the year, it's up to me to cover the cost. I don't really know. I guess I just saved a lot of it.
Do you have an agent or are your parents helping you out with that?
I did do an agent for a long time. Michael Spencer was actually the first agent that I spoke to, and that was when I first moved to Utah when I was 15. His wife had been on the U.S. ski team. He'd been on the U.S. ski team. We talked a little bit, and I just kind of was like, Jason Leventhal is a good friend of mine. He's one of my biggest sponsors. He's helping me negotiate contracts with other people and helping me find sponsors. I kind of was just like, look, I know Jason's paying me everything he can afford to. He's helping me get as much money from my other sponsors as possible. And at that point, I don't think that an agent really made sense in skiing. There wasn't enough money in the sport. The sport wasn't big enough to really have outside sponsors. It took another probably 10 years or so, 8 to 10 years after that, until agents really could make an athlete enough money that it was worth having an agent. If they're going to take 15 or 20% of my paycheck, that's fine. But in order for me to justify that, I want to know that they can make me 15 or 20% more money so that they're at least offsetting their own cost. Until I was 18 to 20, that just wasn't really realistic.
At that time, what do you look like in terms of your appearance, what music you're into? Are you a scumbag kid? Are you a smartass? Are you a punk kid? Who are you when you're getting famous early on? You're a young rock star. There could be a lot of stuff going to your head. What do you look back and see?
I was a tiny kid. I graduated high school when I was 16 or 17, and I only weighed like 105 pounds. I was like 5'4". So I was super, super scrawny, always super tiny, just high energy. I would like to think that I was a good kid. I grew up in farmland in Vermont. I didn't grow up on a farm, but kind of surrounded by good, all natural, healthy stuff. I wasn't really into like a music scene because there weren't really concerts and a lot of music around me. I do remember doing an interview one time, and Mike Nick, he had asked me a couple of months before what kind of music I liked. And I was like, I don't know. I don't really listen to a lot of music. I was like, my dad plays guitar. I listened to some of my dad's albums and stuff. So I went from listening to like Paul Simon, his Graceland album, to all of a sudden I had a new friend who had moved into town who was into like Tupac. And so I started listening to Tupac. And so in a matter of like 2 or 3 months, my answer to that same question, when Mike Nick was standing right next to me, I said, yeah, I listened to like Paul Simon. And then a couple months later, I was like, yeah, I listened to Tupac. And Mike was like, wait, what? How did that happen? Where did that come from? I listened to a lot of random music and a lot of art. And I was surrounded, like most of my friends when I was 11 and 12 in the winter time, like I had, friends in the spring, summer, and fall that I'd grown up with. But my friends in the wintertime were 18 to 25 years old when I was 11 and 12. It was weird. I don't know that I really looked up to them, or at that point, I don't know that I realized how much I looked up to them. Mike Nick wasn't one of my heroes. He was just my buddy.
Right.
Now looking back on it, the way that he treated me and the things that he did for me, he's become one of my biggest heroes. I tried to do the same thing. Like I lived with the Wells family for a while and kind of tried to mentor those kids. And Jossie and Byron and Jackson and Bo James, those guys are all like little brothers to me, and I love them. But I honestly have never been anywhere near the mentor to those guys that Mike Nick was to me. And so looking back on it now, I realize, how lucky I was to have guys like Mike and Jay in my life when I was that age. Because I was so young, I don't think I realized the influence that they really had on me.
A kid at that age being around older guys who are all very talented, you're either going to be the quiet kid who's just letting his actions speak, or you're going to be like a loud punk kid who still has letting his actions speak, but he's also got that cocky side to him. Do you fit into either of those?
Oh, for sure. I ran my mouth like nobody. I mean, that's how I got sponsored by Line in the first place. I had just met Jason Leventhal, and to go back to the beginning, Mike Egan was one of my ski coaches at Mount Snow when I first started skiing. And I ditched mogul practice to go ski in the park for the afternoon. And Mike saw me skiing off, so he came to grab me and ended up seeing Jason Leventhal. And so he introduced me to Jay, and Jay turned around and said, "Hey, watch this. This is Mike Nick. He's the best skier in the world right now." And I watched him do something, and I basically was just like, oh, I was like, I could do that. Everybody else on the line team was like, shut up. Nobody in the world's doing that. Like, he's the only one. And I was like, yeah, I could do it. Instead of telling me to shut up, Jay called me out, and he was like, all right, well, do it if you think you can. So Jay very quickly realized that I would run my mouth, but I was also comfortable backing it up. And he just saw me as a kid who was coachable. And he was kind of like, if I can sponsor this kid now and teach him to be good, and I don't know that I want to say he taught me to be arrogant, but he definitely was like, take the arrogance and learn to check it. Learn, when to run your mouth, and learn when to back it up, and learn that anytime you do run your mouth, you've got to be prepared to back it up.
I talked to a few people about you before we did the podcast, and one thing people said was there's nothing that he says he's going to do that he won't do. He's never going to make a claim like, I could do that. He's always prepared to do it when he says it, and there's not many people like that who throw out crazy ideas that don't seem possible, and it's not a crazy idea. It's what you're going to do.
Yeah, and I think part of that is my lifestyle growing up and being surrounded by the top athletes, not just in skiing, but in a lot of sports, Action sports athletes, they may be professional in one, but seem to always have hobbies in others. So I was always surrounded by top mountain bikers and kayakers and different sports. In my free time, I like to do those. So I think one of the things that separates me from a lot of other guys is that most guys, and it's different, there's a whole new generation coming into it now, but most of the guys who are my age in free skiing got into it 5 or 8 years later. Even Dumont blew up when we were 16 or 17, and his focus was just on skiing. And my focus professionally was on skiing, but I also liked to play these other sports and have a lot of fun. And I think I was able to draw a lot of correlations and connections from the other sports and say, well, I do this when I'm cliff diving or base jumping or whatever. How do I add that into skiing? Like, how can I have that affect what I'm doing here? And so I've got a weird, unique skill set that's different from a lot of the other athletes.
Before we talk about that skill set, I'm going to jump into my final sponsor. They are the 10 Barrel Brewery based out of Bend, Oregon. They live and breathe the ski and snowboard culture. And in the summer, they bike, they hike, but most importantly, they like to drink beer outside. The good folks at the brewery want you to channel your inner 10 Barrel and start a drinking beer outside movement in your town. It's an easy thing to do, but if that's not your style and you happen to be in Bend, Portland, Boise, Denver, or San Diego, check out one of the 10 Barrel pubs for some great food and our favorite beers. If you ski or snowboard, support the beer that supports you, the 10 Barrel Brewery. Find out more about the beer and the pubs over at 10barrel.com. So that was my final sponsor. I'm going to fast forward a little bit in your career. We're probably at about 2000 now. You're 19-ish, and I'm just going to put you in Squaw Valley right now. And around 2004, it's a time in skiing that is pretty stale. I mean, you can look at the Switch 1080 as a huge trick in terms of progression, but by the time 2004 came around and the US Open, every single trick was a Switch 1080. It was diarrhea of the Switch 1080. I was there. I was so bored. I think one person did a 7, and that was the refreshing trick of the day because they didn't do a Switch 10. And then it comes down to you, and I'm sure you're planning on a Switch 1080 because everybody is, but you don't do it. And that's when the Wilson flip comes to be. Can you take us through that?
Yeah. So I was 18. It was the U.S. Open Big Air. I qualified in 8th place, so I got 8th in slope, and Tanner got 7th in slope. So Tanner was dropping right before me in Big Air, and I just remember everybody showed up planning to win the U.S. Open Big Air with a Switch 1080. And I had a Switch Rodeo 1080. Tanner had a Switch Rodeo 1080. Everybody had either a Switch Misty 1080 or a Switch Rodeo 1080 of some sort. So the first 6 guys all dropped in, and they all did Switch 1080s. And Tanner looked at me, and he was like, "What do you got?" I was like, "I don't know. That's what I was planning on doing, but I don't have the name that I'm going to win an event like the U.S. Open by doing the same trick as everybody else. I need to actually out-jump people to win this event." I'm like, "You can do a Switch 1080, Tanner, and you'll win it because you've got a better Switch 1080 and you've got the name behind you that can carry you." Tanner and I talked about it for a second. He was like, "Dude, I hate to do it. I don't have a bigger or better trick." So Tanner dropped in and did a Switch 1080, and that's when I was like, all right, I drop in 30 seconds. So I got 30 seconds to come up with another trick. And, I'd never done it before. The idea had been put in my head actually a couple months before that. I was over at a friend's house in Tahoe, and 2 of my friends were being homeschooled, so they were doing schoolwork, and I was just playing video games, hanging out at their house. And I was playing Amp 2 with the low gravity mode set on, and I launched off a cornice, and I basically was holding the trigger things or whatever, the controller down, in one thing. And I watched this rotation, and I looked at my buddy Luke, and I was like, dude, this rotation actually could be done on skis. I'm watching the snowboarder do it. And I was like, I could do it on skis. It would be like an underflip into a Switch Rodeo or a Misty flip. And my buddy just jokingly was like, do it in the U.S. Open, you pussy. That was the biggest Big Air event. The X Games didn't have a Big Air at the time. So the U.S. Open was by far the biggest Big Air event in free skiing at the time. So I thought about it and just wrote it off. And all of a sudden I was standing at the drop-in at the U.S. Open, and Tanner looks at me and he's like, the 7th person in a row to do a Switch 1080. There are 32 athletes in the Big Air. And I looked around at the top and I just yelled over and I was like, anybody else doing anything other than a Switch 1080? And every single person was like, nope. And so I was like, all right, well, I've got 30 seconds to figure out how to do this double flip. So I just closed my eyes, visualized it a few times. The thought process was kind of funny and pretty straightforward, but I basically looked at it and I said, we've got a roughly 70-foot jump, 65, 70-foot jump. And I was like, I'm going to be landing around 75 or 80 feet. And my first rotation is going to happen a little bit faster than the second rotation. I need to come out, be able to spot the landing and land. So I basically said, I need to do an underflip in 35 feet so that I can do a Switch Rodeo in 45 feet, totaling the 80 feet of hang time that I had. For my first jump, I had 2 jumps in the qualifying round for the U.S. Open. So my first one, I just did a big underflip style cork 7 and basically wanted to feel out what it would feel like to do an underflip on that jump. But instead of just doing an underflip 5, I basically did the underflip 5 and then tacked a late 180 onto it to land forwards.
Okay.
And then went back up, didn't really tell anybody what I was doing. And when I dropped in, I was just like, I'm not even going to think about doing a double flip. I'm going to focus on an underflip and finishing the underflip in the first 35 feet. I'm going to basically be peaking right then. And then I'm going to roll into another flip. So when I do underflips at that time, I normally would do an underflip with a lead safety, with a left-hand safety. And then with a Switch Rodeo, I would normally grab with a right-hand safety or a mute or critical or something. In order to do the first double cork, I actually double grabbed it. I grabbed the first rotation with my left hand and the second rotation with my right hand so that it would just feel as natural as possible. I just kind of went with it and I just pulled it around. I stomped it and I was just like, cool. I don't think at that point I realized how groundbreaking that trick was going to be. I was just trying to win a contest and I knew I wasn't going to do it with a Switch 1080. And I knew that I was tired of seeing people do Switch 1080s. It was actually really frustrating for me after that to watch another 2 or 3 years where guys like Yoon, in every magazine were saying that I was crazy trying to do these double corks and it was risky and it was dangerous. Meanwhile, everybody was doing Switch 1080s. I'm like, guys, am I the only person who wants to not do a Switch 1080 bad enough to make up a new trick?
Right.
A lot of people just thought I was crazy. And, Yoon was one of the guys who kind of helped perpetuate that. I think everybody saw that doing a double cork 1080 for the first double cork wasn't going to take off. So when Yoon started doing the kangaroo flip, it was great because that was something that people looked at and they were like, here's a double cork that's only a 180. It's a double backflip with a 180.
Much more attainable.
Yeah, and people realized that they could start doing double corks. So it's kind of weird that I did the first double cork, but I don't think that double corks were ever going to take off with only me doing them. It definitely was going to take something else. I do think it's funny because if you look at a kangaroo flip, their rotation for it is basically a double mogul flip. It's a half backflip, half Lincoln loop. It's not even an actual corked rotation. So what a lot of people think of as the first double cork, which was Yoon's double cork, the kangaroo flip, isn't even a corked rotation.
The precursor to the modern double is the Wilson flip. When the kangaroo flip came out, it was something that people were talking about and got a lot of press, but that's because you weren't out there doing the Wilson flip everywhere. Do you look at yourself as inventing the double?
Yeah, I did invent the double cork. The Wilson flip was definitely the first one, but it was just kind of interesting because at the time, I was the only person doing them, and a lot of people were just saying that it was crazy, it was dangerous, and whatever. So I didn't really get good scores for it. Like the first time I did it, I got a huge score. It was the biggest score in the 8 or 9 years I had jumped the U.S. Open at that point. The score I got for that was the highest I'd ever seen at the U.S. Open. I don't know if there had ever been one higher than that at that point. But as soon as I showed up to the next couple of events and did it, I didn't get very good scores. I was being beaten by Switch 1080s and occasionally by kids who had a Switch Rodeo or Switch Cork 7.
That should never happen.
Yeah, I was doing a double cork 1080, but nobody really knew what it was or how to judge it or anything like that. So that was when I decided to stop competing because I was like, look, I'm doing a trick that's way harder, way cooler, way more difficult, and I wasn't getting credit for it, wasn't getting scored for it. So I just was like, if I can't win a contest, what's the point in competing? So that's kind of when I stopped doing it. But that also was when Yoon went to Australia, learned how to do the kangaroo flip, and came back, and he was like, I've got a double cork. And people looked at it and immediately were like, oh, it's a double backflip 180 with a Japan grab. That's reasonable. We know about it. And Yoon had this story about how he went to the water ramps and had learned it on the water ramps. And he was doing it super safely and everything. Because I had never done my trick on the water ramp, a lot of people discredit it for that. I don't think people realized that I'd been jumping on the water ramps for 6 years, where Yoon had only been doing it for a month or two.
I don't even care about safety in that respect. If you land that in a contest, it is the judge's obligation to score it higher than the tricks that aren't as hard.
That was my attitude. I'll go into that a little bit more later because I had an interesting conversation at the Olympics with Skog and Sprang about that. But that was my attitude at the time, was that, if I was doing the trick, the judge's job is to put a point value to what I was doing. For some reason, whatever it was, they didn't see the point value as being the same as me. And so after a handful of events where I was being beaten by tricks that were much easier than what I was doing, I just kind of was like, look, I'm done competing. I'm not interested in it. But that's when Yoon showed up with the kangaroo flip that he was calling a double cork. Immediately, he started winning contests and it blew up. And I kind of was like, look, I can call him out on the fact that his trick isn't actually a double cork. I can call him out on a lot of things. But if I do that, the double cork's never going to take off and it's bad for the sport. The best thing I can do is just bite my tongue, watch somebody else get credit for this and blow it up. And at least the sport is going to catch on to it and take off with it. So that was when I lost interest in competing. I was just like, I don't want to say that I was too far ahead of my time or anything like that. I felt like I was doing something that I wasn't being rewarded for. And the sport either needed to catch up to me or needed to recognize it, but it wasn't happening at the time. So I just kind of decided to move on.
Your relationships with the judges and people in the industry, were you a liked person? I'm just trying to figure out how they could score you lower. And if there was any way they could look at you and say, I don't like this kid because of that, and we're going to score him lower.
I don't know. I mean, I had a couple of events when I was younger, X Games qualifying events. There was one at North Star that I had a couple of guys ski up to me and congratulate me, including one of the judges after the event came over and congratulated me on winning it. A couple of other guys came over and congratulated me for winning the event. Team managers and people who knew what they were talking about. And at the end, I ended up tied in 5th place at that one. And the next year, I skied in the same event, the X Games qualifier at Breckenridge. And there were 3 jumps and 2 rails in the run. I did 3 tricks that had never been done before. And the other 2 tricks, one of them had never been done in a contest. And the Dynastar team managers came up and congratulated me. Nate McKenzie, who was the head coach at CVA, came up and congratulated me on winning. And I thought it was ironic because I ended up in 4th or 5th place again. And 2 or 3 of the kids from CVA had beat me. And Nate was like, wait a minute, I just congratulated Mike on winning this. And then a couple of my kids beat him. So I finally at that point got frustrated and I went over and talked to a couple of the judges, and the jerk was the head judge at that point. And I just said, what did you guys not like about my run? Was there something that I did wrong? He said, well, he's like, yeah, you touch your hand down on your Switch Rodeo 7, your unnatural Switch Rodeo 7 on one of the landings. And he said, and you may consider choosing a new ski sponsor.
Huh.
That stuck out to me pretty hard because at that point, I'd had a handful of other companies offering me quite a bit more money to leave Line. I skied for Line forever because I wouldn't have been a pro skier without them. There was no amount of money that was going to buy me away from Jason Leventhal. I was on that product forever in my mind. And to have somebody else say, maybe if you switch sponsors, it would be good. So I don't know that it was necessarily my bad image or Line had a bad image, or if other companies were basically paying to get their athletes into events or to be on the podiums or what it was. But there were just a lot of things that frustrated me at that point, and I wasn't getting the credit that I felt that I deserved with the double cork. And having had that experience a couple of years before at those events, I just was like, you know what? I needed to stop competing. That's when I decided to just focus on filming, trying to have more fun with skiing.
And you filmed a lot. I think you've been in like 30 plus movies or something over your career. A lot of MSP, The Teddy Bear Crisis by Kris Ostness. You've went to a ton of amazing places. You film with a ton of amazing people. If you were to just pick like a top 3 of people that you like to travel with, who would you put on that plane? If it was you and 3 other people, who would be on a trip?
I think it depends on different points in my career. When I was really young, probably Mike Nick, Jason Leventhal, and Reg Puri were the most influential to me when I was really young until I was, 14 or 15. And then the guys I've had the most fun with, I love skiing with Rory Bushfield. I mean, I love doing anything with that kid. He's super, super fun and super, super talented with everything he does. So I love traveling with Rory. But I had a lot of fun with Rory and Riley Poor and myself for a lot of years. I love working with Kris Ostness, whether he was skiing or snowboarding or filming or whatever. To be honest, like right now, if I could go on a ski trip with any 3 people, in the ideal world, it would be Riley Poor, Rory Bushfield, and Kris Ostness. And I'm aware that Rory is the only one who's still skiing all the time. Those are the guys I think that I had the most fun with over the years that I worked with them and rode with them.
In those 3 names, each has a story. So Rory, his energy, I won't say he's a loose cannon. He's not afraid of anything. He likes to have more fun than almost anyone but maybe you. So putting you guys together is an amazing combination. And then you talk about Ostness, who's just an overall legend, whether it was having the first pro model ski for Line or the movies that he's put together. He's an industry icon, one that people don't talk about as much as they probably should.
Which is crazy. I don't understand how more people aren't obsessed with Ostness and his work, because just athletically, he was incredibly talented, but also my favorite movies are the ones that he made before I was even skiing in movies. Tea Time, The Flying Circus, his work with Wind Up. That's what really made me want to be a pro skier, and it just makes skiing look fun.
And then the last of that crew is probably the most tragic story, is Riley Poor, who I think at that time, was he the team manager at Nike?
I worked with him a lot for like 3 to 5 years before he even got into the Nike role, when he was over shooting for Matchstick, and then when he stopped shooting for Matchstick. But Riley, Rory, and I traveled a ton. I think the year before he started working at Nike, Riley and I were both living on couches at Rory and Sarah's house up in Whistler for like 3 months that season. And then when Riley stopped working with Matchstick, a lot of things changed. But that was when I stopped having fun skiing in Matchstick movies. All of a sudden, the guy that I loved working with wasn't there, and I ended up working with a bunch of other guys that I didn't necessarily like or respect, and it made my job a lot harder to feel like I was going to work rather than just going skiing with buddies.
An unfortunate incident in Riley's life was he was injured, I believe, at a Dew Tour after party. And were you there for that?
I wasn't. I got a phone call shortly after it happened, and I didn't really know what to say or to do. And I feel bad admitting this, but I was a pretty shitty friend for a long time. I've always considered myself a really good athlete, like mentally, at being creative and bouncing back from things. I mean, I really only had one major injury in my career, which is the big jump in Aspen that I came up short on. That was in yearbook, that I'm sure everybody has seen.
I'll put a link in the show notes. It is the most miserable crash you'll ever see. It's not like he knuckled it. He came right into the backside of the jump from about 70 feet out.
Yeah, at well over 100 miles an hour. I hit that one, but I bounced back from it really quickly. A lot of that was mental toughness. And when Riley got hurt, I think that was the first time, like the first one of my friends. I'd had a few other friends and acquaintances who had died skiing and base jumping, but he was the first one he was like a roommate of mine. I traveled with him for years. He was one of my best friends. And I think that was the first time that it occurred to me what really was at stake with stuff. And rather than deal with it and be there for him, mentally, the only way for me to deal with it was to turn a blind eye towards it and ignore it. So I feel bad admitting, but like I talked to Riley a handful of times. I mean, I went from talking to him every day to emailing him 3 or 4 times a year. And I don't think I even saw him for 3 or 4 years after his accident, because I was just so petrified of what would happen to me mentally when I saw him again.
I think that happens in every sport when someone has a major injury. When people die, they're gone. You don't have to see the aftermath. You see the families, and it's very sad. But when you see your buddy that you used to shred with in a chair, I mean, that's a total change of perspective, and that's his life, and you have to accept it as much as he's already accepted it. It's a weird thing for an elite athlete to see one of their friends taken off that podium.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously was really close with Sarah. Sarah was like a big sister to me, and losing her was really tough. I also had another roommate, Tim Dutton. I think Tim actually would be another one I would put on the list of 3 or 4 guys that I would love to travel with. Tim was probably my favorite person ever to ski with. Losing those guys was really hard, but for some reason, death was just a totally different thing from a paralyzation. And being paraplegic or quadriplegic mentally is, I don't know, it really messes me up a lot more than death does for some reason. That said, the hardest things that I've ever dealt with in my professional career were Sarah's death and Tim's death and Riley's injury. They definitely changed my mentality towards things, my approach towards things. I shouldn't say that, actually. Maybe not necessarily my mentality and my approach, but definitely the things that mattered to me and the goals and objectives that I was working towards or that I wanted to accomplish definitely changed when friends started getting hurt and dying.
You're getting older at that point, too, and I wonder if that plays into it at all.
Yes and no. It's kind of weird, and I probably shouldn't admit this in an interview, but I'm kind of living my life in reverse. You know, most people go to college, get the best job that they can to make money and retire early, and then go travel the world. I was the kid who was traveling the world first and worrying about retirement and things later on. So I kind of was like, well, if I'm having fun now, why am I going to worry about what's going on later? I kind of had an attitude where if I died at 25 or 30, or if I didn't make it to 30 or 35 because I was having a lot of fun and did something stupid and ended up killing myself, that was okay. And it's interesting because I still kind of have that attitude. Having lost a lot of friends, yeah, it sucks, but at the same time, I would absolutely choose to die tomorrow in a botched base jump or avalanche or something like that than living till I'm mid-90s, but, my body can't do the things that I want it to.
I can see that. I'm going to turn the corner a little bit and talk a little bit about sponsors. You've had a shit ton over your career. What happened with Line the first time when you got off their program?
It's kind of weird that I've had a handful of different sponsors because honestly, I've never signed a single contract in my life without the intention of ending my career on that company's product. I've never taken a contract because it was bigger money than anything else. I've taken a contract because I like the company, I like what they're doing in the sport, and I think that they make a really good product or the best product possible, and it's going to help me do my job as well as possible. And there was no amount of money, like I said earlier, that was going to buy me off of Line. But the relationship with Line came to an end when Line put out the binding. Jay basically called everybody on the team and he said, hey, I've got this new product. It's going to revolutionize skiing. The way that the binding is designed to work is going to save people's knees in a backward twisting fall right now. The only way for you to release in a backward twisting fall is to put enough torque on your toe that your toe releases laterally. Some of them release vertically, but it's a lot of torque on your toe through your heel to make that happen. And so Jason had worked with somebody else to design a binding where the heel piece would release. And I kind of was like, cool, as long as that works, I'll jump on board. But right now I'm skiing for Solomon boots and bindings, and I trust their binding. I like it. I've never had any issues with it. It's been proven for years and years. And I just kind of was like, I'm not comfortable being a guinea pig on a new product when it wasn't just myself, but I also was like, I don't feel like I can put my name behind a product that I don't believe in. I turned down a couple of other major sponsors because of that. I turned down Red Bull when they first got into skiing because of that. And with Line, the same thing happened with the binding. I just kind of was like, I can't ski this product because I just don't believe in it. And I'm not comfortable being a guinea pig. And Jason came back to me and he just said, look, I've put enough into this product that I really need you riding it. If you don't ride it, my company may go under. And I just kind of tried to call his bluff. And I just said, look, I'm not comfortable doing it. I won't do it. And Jay gave it to me in black and white. He said, here's the deal. You either ride this or you find yourself a new ski sponsor. So I just said, all right, I guess I'm going to be finding a new ski sponsor. And he hung up on me. And the next day I was skiing Solomon. That was one of the hardest things of my life because Jason was so instrumental to everything, helping me find all my other sponsors, really putting me on the right career path and making me feel like I was just going out and having fun skiing rather than going to work skiing. And the day that I stopped skiing for Line was a huge pivotal point in my ski career because I don't want to say that I wasn't having fun skiing anymore, But that was the day that I went from skiing just being fun and I was good at it and I was making a lot of money and I was traveling around the world to all of a sudden I had tons of team managers reaching out to me, telling me what to do. And all of a sudden the amount of work that I was doing in skiing went up by 1,000%. And it became way more draining, way less fun to ski, a lot more work, a lot more effort. So I did one season on Salomon and I talked to Salomon. They were just launching clothing. And so my contract with Salomon was good, but they basically were like, we really want you to switch off of Helly Hansen. So as soon as your Helly Hansen contract is gone, we want you on Salomon head to toe. I'd been with Helly Hansen for 6 or 8 years at that point. And again, they were making great product and I didn't feel the need to leave. And so I just kind of was like, maybe Salomon isn't the right choice. So at the end of the year, the first year I was on Salomon, I heard LibTech was making skis. And having grown up snowboarding, I was like, that's kind of a ballsy thing to do. Any snowboard company that gets into making skis is going to get a lot of grief initially. So LibTech has a reputation for making some of the best snowboards in the world. And I was well aware of that having grown up snowboarding. But I also knew that they weren't going to risk getting into skiing or making skis unless they really felt that they could make a better ski than anyone else. That was the kind of company that Line had been and that I wanted to be involved in again. So I called LibTech and set up a meeting and ended up skiing for them for 5 years.
And just thinking of your career, I'm talking ski because we'll talk base in a little bit. And I don't want to say there was a lack of loyalty behind you, but from what I get, you're a hard worker. I mean, from all the things I've seen for you over the years, I mean, you put a ton into your craft and there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of math, a lot of science. You're more talented than most people. I think, if in terms of talent, if you line up any pro skier and start doing other things, you're going to rise to the top based on air awareness and just natural ability. But your career never really blossomed how it should have. When I think of the major names in the sport based on ability, I mean, you think of, there's the Sammy, Seth, there's Pettit. Your name never got up there. And maybe it was the sideshow of people thinking that you're too crazy doing crazy stuff. Have you ever thought that you should have been bigger in the ski world and it never happened? And have you ever tried to put your finger on why?
Not really. Maybe I should have thought more about it and worried more about it. But to be honest, I don't know. I mean, you said that I had a good work ethic and I worked really hard, and I would almost disagree with that. I think that I had a lot of natural talent and I was really gifted. But I think that the other athletes that you just named, the reason that they got to the top is because they worked a lot harder than I did. I went out skiing and had a lot of fun and I was good at it. And I had a cool niche where I liked to push myself and I liked to do new tricks that nobody else was doing. But I wasn't interested in the additional work that went along with that. I was just interested in skiing. I didn't want to do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, that the self-promotion and other stuff that you really need to blow up like that. I don't think Seth Morrison, he got into it before I was even into it. Before there was social media, before there was anything else, he blew up because of his skiing, and his riding, spoke quite loudly for his talent.
Yep.
And I think everybody recognized that immediately and jumped on. A lot of the other guys who have blown up, they've worked a lot harder for it. And I'm honored that you would put me in the same category as far as talent, but those guys worked harder for what they got than I ever did. I just let my talent carry me and tried to have fun with it. I think those guys made bigger names for themselves because they put in more effort to making bigger names for themselves and becoming what they did.
Did you ever have an issue with sponsors that you weren't doing enough and they were frustrated because they'd see some of these other guys making a name for themselves and they realized that you had that same potential?
Not really. I think that in 15 years of skiing professionally, I only ever had 2 contracts that I didn't max out. That says quite a bit about my skiing and the way that I approached it. But when I negotiated a contract, I would just say, this is what I'm interested in doing this year. What do you want from me? All my sponsors knew what I was going to do, and I kind of just set my season up so that I knew what I needed to do to achieve it, to make sure that my sponsors were happy with what I was doing. So I hope I never had anybody who was unhappy with what I was doing and that felt like they were paying me more than I deserved or anything like that. I do know I had a couple of sponsors. I skied for Anon right before Anon decided not to sponsor skiers anymore. I guess I had some bad luck with sponsors in that sense, where I had a couple of sponsors who went under or stopped sponsoring skiers and whatever. But anyways, I skied for Anon for 1 year right before they decided to stop sponsoring guys. And they knew that my focus for the year was going to be on Matchstick's film. So they didn't have a ton of cash, but they wanted to make the contract super performance based, but their goal for me was just to have a badass movie segment in Matchstick. So the contract that they sent over to me without me even doing anything was, I had a pretty small salary. I think it was like $2,500 and then $10,000 for each movie I was in. And that year ended up being the first year that I ended up in Matchstick, but I ended up in Rage as well. And when Ostness decided to make Teddy Bear Crisis, I was able to convince my sponsors to let me do that too. So that contract went from being what they thought was a steal, getting me for only $12,500, to all of a sudden they had to pay me $32,500.
And then they stopped sponsoring skiers.
Yeah, I think pretty quickly they were like, yeah, that was an expensive mistake. We got ourselves into a contract that was stupid for us because this kid looked at it and said, how can I max this contract out and how can I make the most money possible? So I just said, well, all I have to do is get into other movies to double my income from this sponsor. So let me do what I can to get into other movies.
The internet is an area where you could generate a lot of revenue, I would think. You have videos that have over 1 million views and you have multiple videos like that. Are you able to monetize that and get paid from your crazy antics that you get on film?
Yeah. When I put up the first video of a rope swing, it wasn't even into Lake Tahoe. It was shot near Tahoe, but into a river.
The trucky one?
Yeah, exactly. When that video went up, I got an email about a month and a half after that from a lady who was working at YouTube. And this was before Google bought YouTube. And that was the most watched video in the sports section for the entire month that video went up.
Whoa.
And so YouTube reached out to me and said, we'd like to pay you to create content for us. So I had a contract with them to create content, and I've had that with a handful of other people. So yeah, I do make a decent amount of money doing that. But I guess it's, from my skiing background and dealing with sponsors, that I've always preferred to work with sponsors rather than like doing, view counts and stuff. Like I've had a couple of videos that had 20 to 40 million views, most of them 1 to 4 million or 5 million. But yeah, I have had quite a few people pay me to do that kind of stuff. But rather than doing it through something like monetizing a YouTube channel, I normally do it more advertising directly with a client. So I've been hired by Intel and Audi and Samsung and a bunch of other companies to shoot advertising for them. And a lot of times it's not even television ready ads. They're looking for something to go online. And they have me do it because they know that the ads that I'm putting together, I'm pretty comfortable guaranteeing that whatever I do is going to get at least 1 million or 2 million views. And with the right budget, I'd be comfortable guaranteeing at least 5 or 10 million views. And I don't think there are a whole lot of other athletes, especially in action sports, who will guarantee something like that.
To me, it's surprising that they're all not featured on a Mike Wilson branded channel where you're generating revenue too. But I guess your monetization is through the brands, and that's a guarantee right there. You don't have to hope people are watching.
Well, it's a little different. There are some videos that put together just to go viral, and they're just fun videos. I have a bunch that I haven't even released. I have a few that I have. The rope swings into Tahoe and into the river, some zipline stuff, and those are just kind of for fun. And, I didn't put them out on my channel because I have a YouTube channel, but I don't promote it. I'm not trying to monetize it. Those are just things that I did for fun rather than to make money on. Most of the stuff, when I'm shooting for a bigger client, I don't own the rights to it. I shoot the content, produce the ad, but whoever the client is owns it. I don't even have the right to put it out on my channel if I wanted to. So that, I think, is a big reason why I haven't done that. I know Devin Supertramp has worked for me a little bit, and he's making tons of money off of his YouTube channel. And I thought about going that route for a little while, but it's hard with shooting stuff for advertising. I can either put it out on my channel or I can get a bigger contract where I'm just getting paid a salary or a flat rate to shoot the ad and then they own it. So that's kind of the route that I've chosen rather than doing my own channel.
It's the easier route, I would think. You do the work for them. They own the footage. You never have to think about it again. You get a check in the mail.
I mean, I don't know which one's easier. Mine requires less full-time work. I don't have to constantly be thinking about what I can do to try to drive more attention to my channel.
Yep.
I just have to, a handful of times a year, make sure that I'm taking a contract that's going to pay well for whatever client. And it's a product that I believe in. It's a company that I want to work with and promote. So I guess both of them have their ups and downs. But I think that what I do is a better paycheck for less work. I think it takes more talent and less hourly work to do what I'm doing than what those guys are doing.
I agree. It's not your budget to set it up. It's not up to you to promote it. You shoot it, produce it, hand it off. You're done.
Exactly. And I collect my paycheck and I look for the next job.
We've been going for a while and I don't want to keep you all day, but I want to jump into base jump. I shouldn't even say that. I want to talk about base jumping before we get out of here. And that's something that you get in towards, I think, the later part of your ski career. And you live in a place that's known for having some of the raddest base jumpers in the world in Squaw Valley. So it's not anything out of the ordinary to be doing it. But how many skydives do you get in before you do your first base jump?
I did everything wrong. I did it all wrong.
Everybody does it wrong that I talk to.
Yeah, skiers have a tendency to do that. We don't like rules. I really did it entirely wrong. I got into it by mistake. I was coaching skiing. I mean, I shouldn't say coaching. I was training at the Utah Olympic Park and kind of coaching there as well. And JT Holmes was in school at the University of Utah, and he was coaching up at the Olympic Park as well. So I was 18 or just turned 18 at the time. And I actually just went to JT to see if he'd buy me beer. And I was like, hey, JT, what are you up to right now? And he said, I'm busy. I'm supposed to be jumping out of planes. And I was like, oh, like skydiving? And I was like, that's cool. I've always wanted to do that. And he was like, cool, get in my truck. Let's go. So without really thinking about it or realizing it, like it wasn't a conscious effort. It was just kind of on a whim. I was like, all right, let's go skydiving. So I made one tandem skydive that day. Dude, that was super fun. I was like, I want to get into this. So I spent 2 weeks camped out in the back of my car at the drop zone trying to learn to skydive. But I weighed so little. I only weighed like 105 or 110 pounds. And they have to put you on a huge parachute so you fly really slowly when you're learning to fly. Mm-hmm. So because my wing loading was so light, even like a 10 mile an hour wind, which is no problem for most people to fly through, I didn't weigh enough to even get the forward penetration to be able to guarantee I'd land on the airport. So they wouldn't let me jump. So after 2 weeks, JT was heading up to the bridge in Idaho, where it's kind of a famous place to learn to base jump. And JT was like, I'm heading up to the bridge. How many skydives do you have? And I was like, I've only done one. And he was like, dude, I thought you were going to get into it. You've only done one more jump. And I was like, no, I haven't even done one more jump. I've been camped out down here for 2 weeks trying to jump, but it's been too windy. They won't let me jump. So JT just was like, whatever. He's like, come up to the bridge. We'll take you to death camp. So I went up to the bridge. I made 2 base jumps with no real skydiving experience. I mean, I'd made one skydive. I'd never even flown a parachute before. But the bridge up there is a pretty safe place to learn to base jump because it's over the Snake River. So it's 486 feet high. It's plenty high, but it's also, being a bridge, it's one of the safer objects you can jump from. And it also has a super slow moving river, which means that you don't have to know how to fly a parachute, because instead of landing on land, I could just land in the river. So I made 2 base jumps there, just splashed down in the river, and then learned how to fly the parachute well enough that I ended up just buying a base jumping parachute, came back to Squaw, and started jumping off the tram cables. JT and Shane showed me, JT actually showed me how to do it. And then I met up with Shane a few other times, or a bunch of other times, to jump off the tram cables here in Squaw. So part of the reason that Squaw has so many base jumpers is that we have an over 500-foot jump in our backyard jumping off the Squaw tram cables.
Didn't you get in trouble for that?
I did. I got kicked off Squaw. Was supposed to be kicked off Squaw for life for at least a few years. But shortly after that, I got invited back. The head of marketing decided that it was better to have me on their side than not have me on the mountain. So I got kind of lucky. But I think also, one of the saving graces was that they didn't actually catch me doing it. They just heard that I was doing it. And I kind of was like, but you guys also know that Jane and Shay T jump off this. Why am I the one getting in trouble and those guys aren't? But there was somebody else who people saw them do it in broad daylight, and people just decided to point fingers at me for some reason.
They like Shane and JT better.
Yeah, for whatever reason, Squaw likes those guys, and they needed somebody to take the fall for it. So I was the choice. But I think that's why I was, quote unquote, kicked off Squaw for life. And 3 months later, I got a phone call from marketing saying, hey, are you ready to ski Squaw again?
Was McGovern not around? Because I figured they'd give him the fall.
McGovern wasn't jumping at that point.
That makes sense then.
Yeah, he's definitely Squaw's favorite fall boy.
I'm not going to talk about all your jumps, but we might as well talk about the scary stuff. Are there any close calls for you in the air?
I've had 2 base jumps that were pretty scary. Well, actually, neither one of them was scary. Both of them were kind of close calls. There were 2 malfunctions that I've had base jumping. One was when my best friend Tim Dutton decided he wanted to get into base jumping. I bought him a parachute. And base jumping, it's one of those sports that, because it's not regulated, it's getting to be less this way now. But at that point, nobody could walk in off the street and just buy a parachute. You kind of had to know what you were doing. Somebody had to put in a word for you or something.
Somebody had to vouch for your credibility.
Exactly. So when Tim wanted to get into base jumping, I kind of was like, yeah, I'll vouch for him. I'm going to help him. JT's going to help him. I'm like, he's got plenty of guys here who are looking out for him. So I helped him buy his first parachute, but it was supposed to be the newer, better version of my parachute. So I asked him if I could borrow it. And I was like, I'd like to jump it once just to see how it flies for 2 reasons. One, I'll be able to tell you how it flies compared to the skydiving parachutes you've been jumping. And 2, I'd like to see how it flies so that I know if I want to buy one instead of what I've been jumping. So I went and jumped out off the Squaw tram cables, and I'm not sure exactly what happened, but the parachute came out, it got square, but it never inflated. So normally you jump from the tram cables and you've got a 4 or 5 second delay before you open your parachute, and then you've got a 10 or 15 second parachute flight to the ground. And I was on the ground in 6 seconds.
Whoa.
So I jumped, I opened my parachute high to see how it flew, and I should have been flying within 200 feet of the cables, which would have put me 200 to 300 feet high. And I basically looked up to make sure that everything had opened properly. And before I even looked down, I slammed into the ground.
Jesus.
So I don't know what happened or why. My buddy who I was with watched it happen, and he was like, it was weird. He was like, it looked like your parachute opened, but it just never flew. So we couldn't figure out what happened. I ended up sending that parachute back to the manufacturer. They took a look at it. They said that they put it in a skydiving parachute where you have a reserve. They said they jumped it out of a plane 15 or 20 times, never had any issues with it. Then they took it to Moab, jumped it 2 or 3 times off the cliff, didn't have any issues with it. So they sent it back to me. I looked at Tim. I said, look, I've made one jump on this and it didn't fly. Do you want it, or do you want me to sell it or get rid of it and buy something else? He actually had JT sell it, and JT posted it online saying, it's got one jump from us. Mike jumped it. It didn't open. He broke his leg. I'm just not interested in having this parachute anymore. So another girl bought it, and she made her first jump on it, and it didn't open and fly properly, and she broke her ankle. So I don't really know what happened to that parachute or why, but for whatever reason, that parachute didn't like to fly. And the company that made that has actually stopped making that model of parachute. Looking back on it, it's funny, but normally when you see a product, the latest, greatest, newest thing sounds awesome. And I started talking to JT about it, and JT was like, dude, the parachute that you're jumping, made 1,000 base jumps on, that one was invented in 1985. Your parachute was built in 1992 or something like that. It's old, but it's also got hundreds of thousands of jumps, and it's proven that it works. He was like, why would you be a guinea pig on a parachute? That's the dumbest thing you could do. And I was like, you're right. That never even occurred to me. For some reason, I just assumed that when a parachute company was saying that this was the new, better version of a parachute, that it was a safe parachute. It didn't occur to me that there was a trial period, and the first people to buy it were essentially the guinea pigs and the test dummies trying it out.
Yeah.
And then the other bad experience I had base jumping was...
Was it the stepped one?
I'm sorry?
Was it the step shoot? Was that a close call for you?
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten about that. The other one I was going to say was jumping a cliff in Utah. I'd been jumping back east, so I'd been jumping low elevation for a while. And one of the things I hadn't considered was when you go up in elevation, the air gets thinner. When you jump a parachute, you throw a pilot chute that catches air. And when that catches enough air, it puts enough drag on the pilot chute that it pops a pin and opens your parachute. So I went from low elevation where my parachute was opening really quickly to jumping the exact same setup at a higher elevation. And I did a double front flip off the cliff and pitched my pilot chute. And it just was a slight hesitation between when my parachute should have opened and when it did open. And I didn't take into consideration the fact that I was at higher altitude. I just felt like my parachute wasn't open quickly. So I reached back to grab it and force it open. And right as I reached back, my parachute opened into my arm. The lines got tangled around my arm. And actually, when the parachute inflated and caught me, it caught me by my arm rather than equally across my harness. So it ended up breaking all 3 bones in my arm, just above and just below my elbow. And then I had to fly that one to the ground. And then, yeah, as you just mentioned, the third, I guess, close call with base jumping was that shot mutiny with the step guys. They basically called me and said, we've got this idea. Obviously, I knew all about their movies and love their movies. So those guys were like, we want to do something in an urban environment that's never been done before. We're looking to do a ski base with a rail slide. We've talked to a couple of other guys who base jump, and all of them just said, talk to Mike. He's the only one who can do it, or he's the one to do it. He's by far the best base jumper and rail guy. Most of the guys who at that point were base jumping were big mountain skiers. Still are, Shane and JT and that whole crew. So I got the phone call to do it, and I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. That's not really a big deal. It's not a difficult trick. But I was actually in Salt Lake City at the time, so when they asked me to do it, I headed up to Twin Falls, but I didn't have any of my parachutes with me. So I borrowed a parachute from a friend named Miles Dasher, who's...
I had Miles on the show.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, I'm like, Miles. So Miles is kind of, in my opinion, he's the best base jumper in the world. He's a legendary dude and a super nice guy. So Miles was cool enough to loan me a parachute for it. But the parachute he loaned me was a little bit different from what I normally jump. I normally jump a pin system, which is in pretty much all modern base jumping parachutes. You use a pin to close the parachute up. When they were first starting base jumping parachutes, instead of using a pin like they use in skydiving and modern base rigs, they were using a Velcro system. So basically, you would pack your parachute up, And then when you put it in the harness, you have 4 flaps on the harness, one from the top, one from each side, one from the bottom. And you close those 4 flaps up. And the pin system, essentially, you have a little loop attached to one of those 4 flaps, and then a hole in the other 3 flaps. So the loop of material goes through the other holes, and then the pin goes through the loop, which kind of locks everything shut.
Okay.
So until that pin gets pulled, your parachute is stuck on your back. It's not coming out. With the Velcro, it's the same idea. They basically close the 4 flaps up, and each flap has a little piece of Velcro, and then you have one more piece that's attached to your pilot chute that has the other side of the Velcro that hits all 4 of those. So in theory, you throw your pilot chute, the Velcro pulls off, it opens your parachute the same way that popping the pin would pull a parachute out. What I hadn't really considered, and Miles hadn't considered, obviously, was that the Velcro can be pulled just if I were to lean forward and put a bunch of pressure on my back, that puts a lot more pressure against the parachute out on the Velcro, and the Velcro can start to pull open. So what went wrong on that jump was actually a parachute malfunction before I even made the base jump. So we had ice chunks for snow. It was a less than ideal setup.
Yeah.
But we tried originally, they showed up with a whole bunch of ice. We tried to throw it in a wood chipper to break it up and turn it into slush so we'd be able to use it. But this is northern Idaho in the middle of the summer. It was 105 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning. I think when we first got there, it was already 90-ish degrees. So we tried to throw ice in the wood chipper, and it basically just clogged the whole thing up and made a mess. So we kind of were like, all right, well, what do we do now? We just, take the ice, pour it out on the bridge, and we have to go. I looked at it and I was like, if I try to do a speed test to figure out how fast to go, all of the ice chips are going to go shooting off the side of the bridge or shooting under the guardrail out onto the road. It was something like $300 or $500 worth of ice that those guys had bought for it. So I kind of was like, we really only have one shot. I don't get to make a speed check or a test run to figure out how fast to go. So we set up the winch, and what went wrong was essentially as soon as the winch started, it started pulling on my shoulders, which arched my back forward, and the Velcro on the parachute started to peel. Right as I started to move, I realized that my parachute was already opening. As I was skiing in, rather than thinking about what I was doing, sliding a handrail and going into a base jump, I was paying attention to my back, and I was basically trying to figure out whether the parachute was about to fall off my back on the bridge or whether I could get off the bridge before it was going to fall off my back. But either way, there were a bunch of spectators watching. So once I started going, I didn't really have anywhere to go. I couldn't just hit the jump or absorb the jump and jump straight because there were a bunch of people standing there. So I kind of had to hit the rail, and I was going fast enough that I tried it. If you watch the video, I tried to absorb it, kind of got kicked into the back seat. And I initially was thinking I'm just going to grab onto the railing and not fall over the edge. And obviously I ended up with too much speed, flailed, got kicked in the back seat, went over the edge. And basically, I just kicked to stay upright, used my air awareness, my balance to do the best I could. And I got kind of lucky, to be honest, because the parachute did open. But if you actually watch, I never reached into the bottom of the container to pull out my pilot chute. So if you actually watch that video in slow motion or pause it, you'll notice my parachute opens, but the pilot chute, which is supposed to open the parachute, I never threw that. I never even touched it. So my parachute malfunctioned and opened without me opening it.
So it was a positive malfunction for you.
Yes and no. I mean, to be honest, what I was trying to do was basically get upright so that I knew that my parachute, when it came out, was going to come out above me. The parachute's going to open and it's going to inflate. But if my parachute comes out of the container below me, I'm going to essentially gift wrap myself, and it's not going to inflate if I'm in the parachute tangled in it. So when I came off that, I was basically kicking to get upright. Once I got upright, I was planning on grabbing my pilot chute and opening my parachute. That bridge is 500 feet high. I was planning on opening probably 100 or 50 feet high. I was going to give myself 3 or 4 seconds to fall, get stable, get into control of the jump, and then open my parachute. And instead, the parachute came out on its own. So I got kind of lucky that it came out while I was upright. And I think part of that's luck and part of it is the air awareness kicking in, knowing that I needed to immediately get to my feet and control the fall to be able to open it. As soon as that happened, everybody was just like, fuck, we're not going to get the shot. And I looked at him and I was like, why not? And I'm like, I just need to borrow a different parachute from Miles. And everyone was like, you would do that again? And I was like, sure. I know what went wrong. And I can't believe that I was stupid enough to overlook that in the first place. I should say I overlooked it. I thought about it, but I'd never jumped one of those parachutes with the Velcro before.
Right.
And so I knew that it could happen, but I also knew that people had jumped those for 10 years and that it was super uncommon. So I just kind of figured that it was super unlikely and that there were other risks and issues that I needed to be more worried about than that. Turns out I was wrong. So I kind of was just like, yeah, well, I know what went wrong. I know how to get rid of it. Just get a different parachute that doesn't have the Velcro, and that can't happen. So we went back and I nailed it on the second try. Miles knew exactly what I was doing when I went back and did it, because he was like, yeah, as long as Mike gets onto a different parachute, what went wrong in that one can't happen to him again, and he's going to be fine. So I think Miles was comfortable with it. I was comfortable with it. But I think the guys from Step were just like, holy shit, Mike is crazy. I can't believe he almost just died, and then he's going to go back and do it again.
Everybody thinks that when you see the first clip, which I'll put in the show notes. It's crazy that you had no issues with doing it again.
Yeah, but,
it's crazy to the common folk who don't understand it.
One of the things that I learned from that jump that I got hurt in Aspen, the big crash that we kind of talked about earlier, one of the big takeaways from that was to always leave myself a safe way out. I knew before I hit that jump that I wasn't going to clear it, but I didn't have a way to pull out. I basically was going so fast. By the time I knew I wasn't going to clear it, I was going too fast to stop, and I couldn't pull off to either side. And so with base jumping, with everything that I do now, I look at everything and I break it down, and I'm like, at every step, at every point in the process of whatever the stunt is or whatever the sport is, what can go wrong? And when that goes wrong, or if that goes wrong, do I have a safe way that I can pull out of the stunt and not get hurt? And as long as I can do that, then and only then do I move forward and do it. That was the same thing that happened in that situation. I just said, what went wrong? What can go wrong? This is what could go wrong. Initially, I overlooked it, but when it went wrong, I said, all right, I know what went wrong. I know that I can eliminate that problem. And as long as that can't happen, I've eliminated all of the other risks. This is a pretty straightforward base jump. So it's kind of funny that people look at it and they think it's so crazy, because to me, that was just another base jump. It wasn't by any means a more difficult base jump than a lot of the other ones I've done.
At this point, because we've gone for a while and there's a lot more to your life. I mean, you've reinvented a lot of things. I mean, we talk about skiing. I think you did the first 450 onto a rail. You did the first double flip. Then we come into, base jumping. You didn't do that as you should, but you're still going. So that's great. And then rope swings, zip lines, and everything you've kind of reinvented. I mean, from cliff jumping to rope swings, the things that you are building are just absolutely insane. And I'm going to put a lot of those on the show notes so people can see what you're up to. It's time to jump into inappropriate questions. And this week I had a fellow East Coaster. He's a skier from the New York area. His name is Sean Decker. And while I don't think he ever got a chance to ski with you much, he definitely was well aware of who you were, as he grew up skiing right near you. So Sean now is not a pro skier. He's the owner of Decker Tool. Him and his family own a family business in Westchester County in New York. And if you're ever in the need for heavy machinery, and sometimes you probably are, because you build a lot of crazy contraptions, Sean's got them and he'll give you a discount. But I'm going to jump into inappropriate questions and I will put Sean on right now. This is Sean Decker. How long were you a pro skier, Sean?
6 months. Now, call it 5 years.
Pro skier for 5 years, lived the dream, went back to New York and took over the family business. What's life like in the 9-to-5 world coming from being a pro skier?
Some days it feels more like 6 to 6, but that's all part of it, I guess. And right now I'm just sitting in traffic.
Oh, so it sounds awesome.
Oh, yeah, it's great. It's great.
But you own a business, right? You, your brother, and your family own a business, and you're rich?
That's correct.
Sean, it is now time for you to jump into inappropriate questions, and wondering if you have your first question ready for Mike Wilson.
I do, yeah.
Fire away.
It's funny, I didn't ski too much with Mike growing up, which is funny because he grew up skiing at Stratton, which is the mountain closest to Mount Snow where I grew up skiing. I would have to ask, in 1998, when Johnny Mosley came to ski with the Mount Snow freestyle team and you were there on snowblades, do you feel you were cooler than Johnny Mosley at the time, or was he cooler than you were?
It's usually not another guy that talks about ski size, but whatever, we'll let Sean go with that. So, did you feel cooler than Mosley on your 90-centimeter skis?
That's funny, because I don't know if Sean even remembers me, but I do actually remember him. I didn't stay on the Mount Snow freestyle team for very long, but my dad was in real estate sales at Mount Snow. So when I was skiing on a freestyle team, I mentioned that Mike Egan had been a coach of mine when I was a kid who introduced me to Jason Leventhal. That was at Mount Snow. So I do actually remember skiing with Sean on the freestyle team is when we were little kids. I don't even know how old we were. I would have been 10 at the point. So I think he was around my age. I don't even remember. But I don't remember the time he's talking about, but I can tell you as a little mogul skier, I thought that what Johnny Mosley was doing was awesome. It's funny looking back on it now and knowing about the Canadian Air Force and all of the other guys who were really pushing the free ski movement and stuff. But I had just started skiing at that point. I'd only been skiing for 2 or 3 months, and I didn't know anything about free skiing yet. I got introduced to all of that after by the Line guys and after I got sponsored by Line. So I guess at that point, Johnny Mosley was the only guy that I knew who was doing grabs or doing anything unique and different mogul skiing. So he was my biggest hero in skiing at the time. Definitely looked up to Johnny, still look up to Johnny. He's a rad dude and a super nice guy and a great skier. And I think he's done a ton for our sport as well as for freestyle skiing and mogul skiing. And I certainly wouldn't have felt cooler than him on snowblades. I probably felt pretty silly and pretty bummed that I wasn't able to go out and rip bumps with you guys.
All right, so I'm going to jump into question number 2.
It doesn't necessarily have to be in skiing, but is there just one person in skiing or action sports, whatever, who you really just don't like and would want to punch in the face?
I don't know that there's anybody that I would punch in the face or that I even feel that strongly about it. There are people that I didn't really like, but I kind of just more have the attitude that if I don't like somebody, I'll just change what I'm doing or do something different so that they're no longer in my life. I felt that way at a few different points about different people. And, you know, I skied in matchstick movies for a really long time and then got to a point where I just couldn't, like, I love Scott Gaffney and he's the man, but I just really didn't like a lot of the other guys that were working at that company.
Murray and Steve?
Yeah. Personally, I have very little respect for them. I think Steve Winter pressured me into a few things that I shouldn't have done, and I ended up getting really hurt because of something he said one time. And not that I'm going to blame him entirely for it, but I certainly wouldn't have done it without him telling me what he said. And I think that to do that to an athlete is the wrong thing to do and is pretty messed up. And I remember being on the movie tour with those guys signing posters when I was like 15, 16, and I lost a lot of respect for them. And basically, when Riley Poor stopped working for Matchstick was when I was just like, look, I can't work with Murray and Steve. I can work with Riley as long as he's here. But other than that, there's nobody at this company that I really want to work with enough to keep this relationship going.
Well, you definitely answered that question. I'm going to go to my final inappropriate question.
Just go with the regular. There's something that you've done while drunk or partying or not even that you felt like an idiot or felt really bad about doing that thing.
Have you ever gone so big at night that you did some things that you don't remember because you were going big at night? You wake up the next day, you either hear about them or remember them, and you feel just terrible about what you did.
Sure, plenty of times. I grew up surrounded by kids who are way older than me and in a sport where drinking and partying are the norm. I'm not sure that I'm going to admit to anything right now, but yeah, the answer is definitely yes.
Okay, well, we will leave that at that. Mike, I've been a fan from afar, but you're one of those guys that I don't think we ever really ran into during my career as a desk jockey and your career as a professional skier. But one day I'm sure we'll meet up somewhere, and I've appreciated everything that you've done. It's always been great to watch. And thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So that was time with Mike Wilson, and he really reminds me of what I think Johnny from the Karate Kid would be like. A confident, cocky person who has the ability to back it up, but he never got as big as he should have been. While Johnny from the Karate Kid had Daniel LaRusso to take away his thunder, the person that took away Mike Wilson's thunder was most likely Mike Wilson. He didn't put the work in that some of the other professional skiers did, and in turn, his name didn't get as big. But we will still see him all over the internet doing some ridiculous stunts. Next week on the show, I have Scott Chrisman. And Scott is a skier who found himself at home competing in freeride events. He's also a top-ranked podcaster and a business owner. He's overcome a broken back to pursue his dreams, and I anticipate this show is going to have a whole bunch of positivity, which is something that we haven't had in a little while, and it'll be a refreshing change with Scott. That's next week. Until then, please review me on whatever platform you listen to me on and tell your friends about the show. Finally, I want to thank my sponsors. They are Evo.com, RESQWATER, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Unofficial Networks. They make the show happen, so please support them. Thanks for listening, and have a great week, everyone.